In week 11 of World Religions, we addressed the topic of atheism. And one might ask whether atheism is a religion, and that's a fair question. You could harken back to the five C's: code, community, creed, canon. Does it fit those hallmarks of religion? It's certainly a belief system. I think it's important to point out that atheism isn't only a lack of belief, it's also a positive belief. It's the belief that there is no God. It's not agnosticism, which would see the question of God's existence as an open question and say, I don't know. Agnosticism can either be a philosophical agnosticism, which says we cannot know, that question is beyond the limits of human knowing, or it can be a more personal agnosticism where one says, I just don't happen to know at my point in life, given my level of investigation of the question right now, I don't know. Either of those are agnosticism. But atheism is an assertion there is no God. And in that sense, I think we could argue it's a worldview, and atheism hence can be included in a study of the world religions. We'll look at two distinct kinds of atheism. There's what we might call classical atheism. Classical atheism is the atheism of philosophers such as the existentialists, Nietzsche, Sartre, and Camus, and it's rooted in philosophical argument. And one of its arguments against God's existence is the problem of suffering and the problem of evil. And it's a compelling argument. It might be said that no religion offers a watertight response to this objection to God's existence. If there is a God who is all good and all powerful in a world where there is terrible injustice and innocent suffering, why doesn't God intervene? God cannot intervene. God is not omnipotent, all powerful. If God chooses not to intervene, it would appear that God is not good. So which goes, the goodness or the all powerfulness? And either way, whatever you're left with doesn't sound very much like God in the classic sense of God any longer, lacking either the will or the ability to intervene in the face of innocent suffering and horrendous evil. That's, I think, very typical of classical atheism, to raise that problem. And it is a very significant one for theists to attempt to address. Then there is the new atheism. And there's a chapter on the new atheism, well, a chapter on atheism in our course textbook. Stephen Prothero's God is Not One, his chapter on atheism, deals with the new atheism in part. The new atheism is distinct from classical atheism in the sense that it's not so much a philosophical objection to the existence of God based on the problem of evil or other very, very compelling and serious philosophical problems, so much as a ridicule of religion, a mockery of religion in the sense of beliefs in God, or even more broadly, a mockery of religious beliefs and practices. So while the classical atheism is represented by existentialist philosophers like Nietzsche and Kant and Sartre, the new atheism does have its intellectual advocates, Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett. But it's also popularized by figures who are not academics, not intellectuals. Bill Maher, who we have heard from on this course before, the late night TV host, political commentator, comedian, arguably. Ricky Gervais, the British comedian. Their representations of religion tend to be quite mocking rather than an intellectual engagement. If you get a chance to watch Religulous, a movie by Bill Maher, you'll see that Maher tries to attack the Christian faith not by debating some tenured professor in the theology department at Harvard or Yale or Notre Dame or Georgetown. No. Where does he go when he wants to argue about Christianity? He goes to a truck stop outside Charleston, and he rips apart truckers, some who seem barely literate and seem to have lacked opportunity to become theologically or religiously literate. That's where he goes to have the argument. With all due respect to those people, and not to mock them, it's somewhat akin to going to kindergarten to have an argument about mathematics, rather than go to the math department at a top-tier university. It's attacking straw man versions of religion, and mocking people for believing in somebody living in the belly of a great fish for 3 days, the Jonah story in the Old Testament. As if all Christians believe this at face value in a literal way. And of course, the talking snake and the talking donkey and the usual literalism in relation to the Hebrew Bible. That tends to characterize a lot of Marr's attacks on religion. The assumption that every religious person is a literalist and a fundamentalist. Marr and Harris also tend to assume that people of faith are exclusivist in their thinking, to the point where they believe that people of any other faith, any other religion, are all going to hell. Now, first of all, not all people of faith believe in hell. So it would make sense on that level. But also, there are plenty of people of faith who regard the other world religions as other ways of expressing belief in God or the gods or the sacred. And they might say those ways are not the way they have chosen. It's not the best way they have found, but they don't dismiss them as utterly worthless or a pathway to hell. And there's the argument that Harris will make, and Ricky Gervais will make, that religion is just an accident of your time and place in history. Like, aren't you lucky if you're born in Pakistan and you're a Muslim? How lucky, because those Christians are going to hell. And if you're born in Tennessee in the US, you're probably a Baptist. And again, how lucky, because if you weren't, you'd be going to hell. As if nobody ever goes on a religious journey and chooses their faith. Nobody ever converts to another religion, drops a religion, recommits themselves to a religion. There's no personal choice or intellectual role in people's thinking about religion. Part of this may be the fallacy that religion is entirely based on faith, and faith that is irrational. It's only subjective. Faith is not limited to reason, but faith can be informed by reason and go beyond reason. It can go beyond the point where we can continue to provide reasoned argument, but it shouldn't clash with reasoned argument. If it does, if we believe irrational, unreasonable things, we're prime targets for the cult leaders. Because why wouldn't we just believe whatever they say? And if it's only based on faith with no role for reason, if religion is just subjective and fideistic, only faith-based, why not believe what anybody from David Koresh to Charles Manson had to say? Clearly, reason has a role to play in religion. Religious people are not all irrational or fundamentalist or infantile in their thinking. So the discussion post this week will focus on an objection made by John Lennox, who is, I think it's fair to say, a philosopher, also a mathematician, most of his career a mathematician from Oxford in the UK. John Lennox takes on the argument about evil and suffering, ruling out the existence of God. So the argument was that if God is all good and all powerful, God would do something about the problem of evil. I want you to listen to the video where Lennox talks about Richard Dawkins and Richard Dawkins' way of phrasing this objection to the existence of God based on evil and on suffering. Lennox identifies something quite profound. Now, it might be going too far to say that it's a kind of watertight debunking of the problem of evil. Perhaps nothing does. I mean, if you've suffered or known somebody who's suffered, you know it's a real problem. But Lennox's response seems at least to pave the way towards making sense of the horrors of unjust, undeserved suffering and evil. So the discussion post asks you, what do you think of Lennox's retort to this atheistic argument from Richard Dawkins? It's at least worthy of your consideration and of your commentary. You may not be swayed by it. And of course, you always have academic freedom. You may find some of the arguments made by spokespersons for atheism more compelling. But you do need to show that you have at least that you know what you know what Lennox is saying. At least provide evidence of it. You can disagree, you can agree, but do show that you are aware of that specific argument. How does Lennox pick up on the way in which Richard Dawkins cites the problem of evil, to say that ultimately this may not make sense, and in a counterintuitive way, the problem of evil may actually point towards the existence of God. Again, you don't have to agree with me or John Lennox or Christianity or Stephen Prothero or anybody else. By all means, think for yourself. And I'm sure what you come up with will be a gem. And I really look forward to seeing it.